So hi everyone, thank you again for joining us today. Thank you Joshua and Dvir for joining us as well. It's great to have you here. So Joshua is a Vancouver-based immigration lawyer who provides immigration services to individual and corporate clients worldwide. Joshua regularly assists clients with Canadian admissibility issues, procedural fairness, and matters and refusals. Dvir Egdal, owner and co-founder of Egdal Immigration Consulting, is a member in good standing with the ICCRC and is a certified immigration consultant. He's helped countless people become permanent and temporary residents of Canada through Canada's federal and provincial immigration programs. Thank you again for joining us today, guys, and good luck.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. Good morning, Dvir. How are you?
Good. Thanks, Josh. How are you doing?
Good. And good morning to everybody. I'm going to give you a little background behind our presentation, and then we will get started without delay. My name is Joshua Slayen, and I'm a Vancouver immigration lawyer. Dvir is a good friend of mine, and he's an immigration consultant. And we thought that it would be a nice opportunity for us to share conversations that we normally have about immigration with you folks. And we're going to proceed to talk about certain immigration matters involving work permits, labor market impact assessments, and different permanent residence streams. We want this to be interactive, and we want you to have an opportunity to ask any questions or chime in and give your opinion on anything. So again, I'm Joshua. It's a pleasure to have you and a pleasure to be here this morning. And I'll pass it off to Dvir for introductions.
Hi, everybody. As Josh mentioned, my name is Dvir. I'm an immigration consultant. I'm out of Edmonton. I work with Josh regularly on anything that has to do with immigration. Excuse me. Yeah, so Josh and I wanted to discuss today a little bit about kind of a mixture of things, the LMIA process, work permits, and inadmissibility issues. If through our presentation anybody has any questions, feel free to ask and we're happy to answer anything.
Thank you. And yeah, so we're going to touch base briefly on the work permits, the LMIA, and the permanent residence, I should have said, in order to move into admissibility issues. So first we'll get the framework down, and then we'll talk about pitfalls. So the first thing that we wanted to discuss, so again, it'll be labor market impact assessment, and then work permits, permanent residence, and admissibility issues. So the first thing is, Dvir, we hear a lot about LMIAs, labor market impact assessments. They seem to have a significant impact on Canadian immigration. Can you tell us a little bit about what LMIAs really are and how they affect employers?
So the LMIA, it's a process that is not done through immigration. It's Service Canada. The LMIA is a process that determines whether an employer, a Canadian employer, can bring a foreign national to work in Canada and whether that foreign national would have a neutral or positive impact on the market. So basically, us as representatives, we have to prove to the officer that the employer has made bona fide efforts to hire locally, and that if they were not able to hire locally, to prove that there's a major labor shortage. And by bringing a foreign national into Canada, it's going to fill that labor shortage and also not going to negatively impact the market. So Service Canada will do their assessment. There are a few different streams of LMIA. There's high wage, there's permanent residency, there's low wage, there's caregiver stream, there's agriculture. So every employer would have to determine, or we would have to determine which stream matches the position in the employer's company. And then we would apply to that. And of course, every stream has its own requirements that we have to go by. And that's how we would put the application together. So, and then once we obtain a positive LMIA, which is what Service Canada would give, then we would apply to Immigration Canada for the work permits. And the work permits, I'd let Josh speak a little bit about that.
So Dvir, this first stage is applying for the LMIA, and then you said something about a work permit. So is stage number 1 the LMIA and stage number 2 the work permit?
Yeah, so the LMIA, as I mentioned, is done to Service Canada. So Service Canada or Employment and Social Development Canada would determine whether the company can bring in a foreign national, just to prove that you're not taking a Canadian job, or by bringing a foreign national, are you going to be creating more Canadian jobs, thus positively impacting the labor market? And then after the company receives a positive LMIA, then we are able to take that positive LMIA, add the foreign national's name onto that LMIA, and then with that LMIA, we can now apply to Immigration Canada to receive the work permit.
So let me ask you a question. Let's say I'm an IT services company and I found the best computer programmer in the world and they live in the United States. And I want to bring that computer programmer, we'll say we'll just say, because there's other options for US citizens, we'll say they live in India. And I want to bring them to Canada. Is it enough, Dvir? Can I just tell Immigration Canada that I found the best person in the world? I mean, if it's the best, clearly they're going to add to Canada. Clearly they're going to generate revenue. Can't I just tell Canada that they're the best and apply for a work permit?
So no, Canada has to determine. So the best doesn't really make any difference over here. You have to prove that a Canadian is not able to do that job. Whether that person from India is the best or not, or what they do really makes no difference. What we have to prove to Social Development Canada is that we were not able to hire locally, and that by bringing a foreign national, we will be filling a labor shortage. And maybe by bringing that foreign national, because let's just say they are the best or they are capable to do what they what we hire them to do. So by that, we are going to create Canadian jobs. So meaning I'm going to hire that programmer. Maybe he's now going to be head of a project. Maybe now I can hire people under him. So those people are going to be Canadians. That's going to positively impact the market. Now I can apply for a work permit after they've determined that bringing that foreign national into Canada will positively impact the market.
Thank you, Dvir. Thank you. I know that you're dying to ask me questions about work permits, so go right ahead.
Well, with the work permits, I'd like you to explain a little bit about the difference between, first of all, why does a person need an LMIA in terms of Canada, I mean, other than from Service Canada, and are there ways around an LMIA? Does everybody need an LMIA?
It's a great question. So a couple things about LMIAs. The first thing, a couple things about work permit. Number one, an LMIA is necessary for lots of work permits, but not for all work permits. There are LMIA exempt work permits too, where you do not need to advertise the position and you do not need to submit an initial application to ESDC Service Canada. So an example of one is an ICT, an intercompany transfer. That means somebody has been working for the parent company overseas or in a different country for one continuous year out of 3 years in a specialized or senior managerial position. At that point, that person would qualify without advertising, without an LMIA to come to Canada. Another example is NAFTA, or CUSMA, as we call it. For certain positions through NAFTA, you do not need an LMIA. You can apply directly to Immigration Canada. When somebody is doing a work permit, or when an applicant is applying for a work permit, there are two parts of the test. Part number one is, do you have the means to support yourself in Canada? So through your salary or through your savings, etc., are you able to support yourself in Canada? Number two, the next one is, are you going to leave Canada at the end of your stay? And that's one where a lot of people get into trouble. Canada doesn't just assume you're going to leave at the end of your stay. You have to show Canada that you're going to. Hey, I'm from the United States. I have bank accounts in the United States. I have friends, family, job opportunities, an entire life to go back to in the United States. You have to walk the officer through that framework and through that analysis, because the officer, when they're adjudicating your work permit, is not going to is not going to just assume anything. You have to tender that evidence up front with your work permit application.
And what if a person wants to become a permanent resident prior to coming here?
Well, there are options to apply for permanent residence prior to coming to Canada. Generally, you're going to need one of two things to apply for permanent residence before ever getting here. Number one, you're going to need a job offer in Canada. And or number two, you're going to need to have an exceptional background. Young, educated, work experience, good English or French, etc. So those are some of the ways you could come here before Canada. But speaking about permanent residence, Dvir, I know that you've been doing a lot of permanent residence work lately. Can you tell me a little bit about what options are available for folks to apply for permanent residence in Canada?
So permanent residence in Canada, generally I like to divide it into two sections, and each section has a subsection. So it would be federally and provincially. So if you go by the federal avenues, so the federal is generally express entry. Federal Skilled Worker Program, the Federal Skilled Trades Program, the Canadian Experience Class, Self-Employed. So all of those are the express entry streams, and you can become a permanent resident without even stepping a foot in Canada if you enter the express entry pool. And as Josh mentioned, you're educated, you're young, you have all the criteria to get high points, and then they'll take your name out of the pool. And then you can apply for permanent residency if you get an invitation to apply. The other way is doing it through the provincial nomination. So a provincial nomination, there's a lot of people who don't qualify under the federal express entry, but they may qualify under a provincial nomination. So in order to, and every province would have their own provincial nomination process, which can be, you can do it through maybe being a student in Canada or through a skilled worker. Alberta even has a program for non-skilled workers, NOC D and C, as long as you have, it's called Alberta Opportunity Stream. As long as you have an employer and you have worked for a certain amount of time, you can apply. Some of these programs are not point-based systems, they're eligibility-based, so that means that you're not with the express entry pool. If you're over a certain age, if you don't have enough education, if you don't, it's going to be a problem. The provincial programs are sometimes more friendly for people who have a job offer, are a little bit older, and they meet the eligibility criteria, and then they can enter, not through the back door, but through a different door, I would have to say.
So what do you like better? Do you like the federal express entry system better, or do you like the provincial nominee program better?
You know what? To me, there's no better. There's what does the client, how do I fit in the client? Of course, if a client qualifies to the federal express entry, I would put them through the federal express entry just because it's express, so it could take 6 months as opposed to 22 months or even longer if the province is a little bit slower. So the provincial nominee programs can take a very long time. So if I have a client that qualifies for the express entry, I will put them through the express entry, but just because of the time. Both programs are great programs if the person qualifies.
So we've spoken a little bit about LMIAs. We've spoken a little bit about work permits, and we've spoken a little bit about permanent residence. Dvir, I want to, as we edge into admissibility, I want to ask you a little bit about refusals. What are some of the reasons that immigration applications are refused?
Well, I think the most common one, well, there's a few. Of course, it depends whether you're applying for temporary residency and permanent residency. Both are adjudicated a little bit differently. When you are working on, when you apply to IRCC for a temporary residency, IRCC doesn't owe us an explanation, or they owe us an explanation, but they don't owe us, there's no appeal process in a temporary residency application. So an officer can refuse an application due to missing documents, missing signatures, you didn't you didn't prove that you will leave Canada at the end of your stay. You didn't prove that you have enough experience, enough funds. You're inadmissible to Canada. There are many reasons why a person would be denied a work permit or any temporary residency. I think generally what I've noticed when people come to me to try and help them, people don't understand the framework that has to go into an application. And they seem to think that if I just put A, B, and C together and submit the forms, that's it, I deserve it. When do I get my work permit? Because I meet the eligibility criteria. It doesn't work that way. And I've noticed that missing documents and missing signatures and not following instructions is a very, very big cause for refusal. Josh, I wanted to ask you a little bit about that because this is something that I think we deal with in every application, which is inadmissibility. I mean, we deal with just to not that every application has an inadmissibility issue, it's just that it's something that has to be addressed in every application. So can you talk a little bit about inadmissibility issues?
Absolutely. I could talk about inadmissibility all day. I find inadmissibility more fun than admissibility. So a couple things. So we started talking about refusals, and refusals can happen for a number of reasons. They can happen because there's missing documents or the application wasn't structured properly. And it can also happen because somebody doesn't prove what needs to be proved. Hey, this job has to have a master's degree. I don't have a master's degree. Well, you can't do the job. You know, there's no arguing that. So there's substantive reasons for refusal, and there are, we'll call it, for rejection, there's application errors that can lead to a rejection. Now, admissibility can also lead to refusals, and that's sort of where we're getting to today. So in order to come to Canada, there's certain basic admissibility requirements that you have to be able to meet. Number one, you have to be able to show that you're not going to be a drain on Canada's medical system, okay? Canada's medical system. That is called medical admissibility, and we will get into some of those details and what medical admissibility really means. The next one is, and what's very well known for, is criminal inadmissibility. Generally, if somebody has committed an offense that is punishable, not punished, punishable by 10 years, or sorry, if it's punishable by way of indictment, or if it's punishable by way of hybrid, where the prosecution can decide if they want to prosecute by indictment or summarily, then that would mean the person is deemed inadmissible to Canada. Now, there's certain offenses that you can look at and say, well, that makes a lot of sense. You know, murder, armed robbery, you know, it makes sense. Some of the other ones are more common offenses that folks have that they wouldn't necessarily suspect would deem them inadmissible to Canada. An example could be excessive speed when you're driving and you get pulled over. That, depending on the facts, that could end up deeming you inadmissible to Canada. Another one, as an example, is when you have a driving under the influence. The folks from the United States are shocked because in the United States it's treated as a misdemeanor in many states, whereas in Canada it's a felony and it's certainly punishable by way of indictment. Folks that have a DUI, they have to pursue inadmissibility applications that I'll get into in just a moment. But I've addressed medical inadmissibility very briefly and criminal inadmissibility. One of the ones I wanted to ask you about, Dvir, is what happens when an applicant to Canada has been determined to have misrepresented themselves on a form. An example of a misrepresentation is, yeah, I have 5 years of work experience as a lawyer, whereas really you've never practiced law in your life. What would happen in that scenario?
So I think misrepresentation is probably one of the most common inadmissible offenses, and also extremely hard to overcome, because it does say in the IRPA, the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act, that whether intentionally or unintentionally misrepresented yourself. So, for instance, if a person tries to enter the United States and they don't have a visa and they're denied entry, they're turned back and they tell them at the border, no, you can't. You need a visa from your country. Go to the embassy, get a visa. And then there is a question: have you ever been denied entry into Canada or any other country? And the person could write, no, I've never been denied entry because I went then to my visa office or to the visa office, I got a visa, and then I entered the United States. So some people, I've seen that a lot, misinterpret that question and mark no where they should have marked yes. And then Canada sees that as misrepresentation. And then, of course, there's information sharing between Canada and the United States, but that's just one. It's all countries that you need to be truthful about. And then a person would have a procedural fairness letter. They would be told, no, you wrote wrong over here, and can you explain yourself? And at that point, that's usually when I turn to Josh, and because Josh is an expert when it comes to inadmissibility, and we try to come up with the best strategy per se to overcome that inadmissibility. And many times it's not always that simple, because even if people made a mistake, it does say over there whether intentionally or not. So basically, when it comes to inadmissibility issues for misrepresentation, I think that a lot of them are done innocently or thoughtlessly, and can be not overcome, but can be avoided if you just speak the truth. And the truth goes a long way in immigration. An immigration officer does have a lot of discretion, and they can make choices where they can say, well, I don't see that because you revealed it. I see it. And I remember you gave me a great advice quite a while ago, that if we find out about an inadmissibility issue and we let the officer, we submitted the application. And when we submitted the application, we did not know about the inadmissibility issue, and later we find out about it. If we let the officer know about that issue before they find out, that goes a long way into dealing with that inadmissibility issue or the misrepresentation. And I found it to work very, very, very well.
Yeah, it's so one thing, I'm going to share a quick story about misrepresentation, and this story is intended to scare everybody. I was in a hearing for somebody who misrepresented themselves on an application, and what happened was their consultant had completed the forms and submitted the forms without them ever reviewing it, and then the consultant forged their signature. So we went to a hearing, and I said to the folks, I said, it's really hard to win misrep. I said, we're not going to win. We're not going to win. They said, Josh, do your best. So I went to give a closing argument, and it was the best closing argument I've ever given. And it was about how the consultant did this. My clients had no idea. Had they known, 1, 2, 3, and the judge didn't even look at me. And the judge just said, nope, you're gone. Sorry, leave Canada. That's literally what happened. They didn't even listen to me. So what does that go to show? It goes to show there's no real way out. When it comes to misrepresentation, you got to be super, super careful, because at the end of the day, it can change your whole house of cards. Now, before we get into inadmissibility applications, I'm looking here and I see that a few people asked some questions. The first one was, there was a question about express entry and how to get an invitation to apply. Dvir, you do a little bit more express entry than I do. Why don't you respond with how to get an invitation to apply, and then I'll touch base on the one for international students.
Okay, so first of all, to get an invitation to apply, the first step is to be in the pool and to meet the criteria. So when you upload your profile into the express entry pool, IRCC will then send you a letter and tell you whether you've been accepted and whether you meet the criteria. And then it will tell you which criteria you meet for which program. Do you meet the Canadian Experience class, the Federal Skilled Worker, the Federal Skilled Trade, or do you meet all of them? Some people do meet all of them. And then every 2 weeks for the Canadian Experience class, Federal Skilled Worker, there's the different ones have draws in different times. So you're always are looked at, you have points, and the points are looked at in comparison to other people. So they would have the lowest candidate to be invited to apply. And then if your points are above that lowest candidate, then you will get an invitation to apply, and then you can apply for permanent residency. If they are below that, you cannot. There are, of course, ways of raising your points, such as better English results, getting a job offer, studying in Canada, getting a Canadian work experience. All of those will raise your points and will raise your chances of getting in. But that's how you would get an invitation to apply. You upload yourself into the pool, and you hope you have enough points.
And also for Yusuf, for Yusuf, if you want to know what your likelihood is of obtaining an invitation to apply, you can go and Google the word CRS Calculator Canada, CRS Calculator Canada, and then in another screen you can open most recent express entry scores, and then you can go and you can see what the likelihood is of you qualifying. That's number one. And number two, bear in mind that you also need to assess your eligibility, okay? Now, there's some more questions. We're just going to get to some questions here. Is there an age limit in applying for a work permit? I'll answer that one. No, there's no age limit in applying for a work permit, but the job might have things that require certain things. Let's say you're applying to be a roofer and you are an 80-year-old man or woman. Well, in all likelihood, age can affect your application because you may not be in a physical position to do the physical work that's required of a roofer. But no, there's no problem on its face for applying for a work permit at any age. It said if a CSQ for Quebec was denied for misrepresentation, does it affect an express entry application? I don't do any Quebec immigration, neither does Dvir. So unfortunately, Sadil, I'm just not going to address anything involving CSQ. Yusuf, I see that you provided your points. We're not in a position where we can give professional advice just because it's we're online. So I'm not going to be able to answer that. But I do thank you for asking the question. We're going to go to international students. I'm going to let Dvir answer that. I'll read the question. And then we'll go on to a different one. Okay, so international students question. Okay, is there any path currently for international students in Canada towards PR? What is the shortest path for current international students towards PR? Dvir?
So I guess you have to look at it, first of all, where you are. For instance, if you're in Alberta and you've studied in Alberta, then there is a path. At the end of your studies, if that designated learning institute that you are studying in has an option of applying for a postgraduate work permit, after you apply for a postgraduate work permit through the provincial nomination program, there's a pathway for PR for postgraduate permit holders. There's also, it gives you points. So keep in mind, a lot of people can work while they are in Canada on a study permit, but that work is temporary, part-time. That part-time doesn't matter if you work at a hospital as a doctor or whatnot, doesn't give you Canadian skilled work experience while you're on a study permit. So just because you were in Canada for a few years studying and working at the same time, you might not be able to qualify unless you had a work permit, were able to work full-time during that. So it will give you points towards your express entry for studying in Canada and getting a degree in Canada, maybe getting a certificate of a sort or a profession. and you are going to be able to go through a provincial nomination, but that depends on which province you are. For instance, Ontario doesn't have a pathway through the provincial nomination for international students. So if you studied in Ontario and then you got an open work permit under the postgraduate work permit, and now you move to Alberta, because they do have a pathway, you're not going to get in because you would have had to study in Alberta. So.
And one thing to note about international students, and we will get to some other questions in a moment, everyone. One thing to note about international students is, you know, I always call immigration a house of cards. You build your house of cards, and you want your house of cards to be strong. Coming here as an international student is building that house of cards, the first step for a lot of folks. You come here, you get a Canadian education, you get points for it. And then when you're done your Canadian education, you are, if you meet the eligibility criteria, you will receive up to a 3-year postgraduate work permit, which allows you to get skilled work experience in Canada. So now you've gone to school in Canada, you're getting skilled work experience in Canada. Your English, if English is second language, has drastically improved by now, and you know, at that juncture, and that all those factors combined, whether it's through the provincial program or through the express entry program, they will improve your scores and give you better chance. So going to school in Canada generally is a very good thing for your immigration. Okay. I was asked, there's specific programs for various job trades. Is there something specific for solicitors? No, there's no one specific immigration path that's there for solicitors. I saw that Z had asked a question about COVID travel restrictions. COVID travel lately has been changing daily, and I just can't give off the cusp advice about anything involving COVID travel. It's too fact dependent, and the policies are changing too much. So if you did get a permanent resident visa, that's awesome. You may want to talk to someone about some of your options during COVID. So I think we've touched on a lot of those questions, and we have a little bit of time that is still left. So I thought that we would move into different admissibility applications. Admissibility for folks that are immigrating, admissibility may or may not impact you. You may have a perfect history and a perfect track record of success. I don't. You may. And if you do, that's fabulous. Although I don't think I have anything that deems me inadmissible to Canada. But the point I'm trying to make is you're going to have friends and family and folks that want to come here, and they're going to have admissibility issues. And it's going to happen. Admissibility is not going anywhere. So I just want to touch base on a few things. I'm going to start with criminal, and then I'm going to let Dvir talk about medical for a moment. So when it comes to criminal, if you have committed an offense that deems you inadmissible to Canada, there are two options. Number one, you are able to apply for a temporary resident visa if it has been less than 5 years since the completion of your sentence. Or you can apply at every time, but there's another option once 5 years has passed. So I have a DUI. It's been 2 years since I got the DUI. In that case, you can apply for a TRP to enter Canada temporarily, and you do not have a permanent resident option until 5 years has passed, unless it's something on humanitarian and compassionate grounds. Once 5 years have passed, you have the opportunity to apply for what is called rehabilitation. Rehabilitation, and that's where you say, hey, Canada, it's been 5 years. I've been a good kid. Haven't done anything since. You know, I went to my, you know, for a DUI, I went to alcohol counseling. I, you know, completed my sentence. I paid my fine. Please let me in. Well, that would be a rehabilitation application. So if under 5 years, temporary resident permit, it's not really for permanent residents. However, after 5 years of completion of the sentence, you can go and you can apply for rehabilitation, and that can qualify you to apply for a regular permanent residence stream.
So, Josh, applying for rehabilitation, do I send that application to the same office that would adjudicate my other application, or do I have to send that separately to a different office?
You're getting a little complicated for me, Dvir. No, it depends. Generally, I would include that application, a rehabilitation application. I would include it in a permanent residence application. However, in many cases, if you're applying for permanent residence, you would separately submit the rehabilitation application to the visa office. Rehabilitation is generally determined by the visa office. I would also put a copy in with the permanent residence application if that was happening. And certainly at all times, disclose. Dvir was dealing with a situation this morning where he has someone who was driving without a license, and he's working with someone who didn't want to disclose it, that they were driving without a license. Well, driving without a license could be an indictable offense in Canada, and it deems one inadmissible, or it could deem one inadmissible. So think about how horrific that would be if the applicant didn't disclose the offense, and then there's a police clearance check that's done, and then it shows up there. That's what we would call a house of cards blowing over, an immigration house of cards. Very difficult to save at that point. Dvir, I want to ask you a question. Let's say I'm applying for permanent residence. This is on medical and admissibility. Let's say I'm applying for permanent residence in Canada, and I do my medical, and everything happens, and God forbid we find out that I have a critical illness. Say I have cancer or MS. What happens when an immigration officer adjudicating my application sees that I have this medical problem?
Well, first, a couple of things are going to happen. You're most likely going to get a procedural fairness letter asking you to, the officer is going to tell you, I have an issue. This is my issue with the application and with the inadmissibility based on a medical inadmissibility. And then you would have to explain to the officer why you think that you are not medically inadmissible to Canada. So medical inadmissibility, I guess, can be looked at in a few. So if you are medically inadmissible to Canada, does that mean that it means that you would probably put a strain on the social or health services of Canada, or you're a danger to yourself or others. So that means, for instance, if I have tuberculosis, I may be a danger to others. So because of that, I would be medically inadmissible to Canada. If, God forbid, somebody has cancer, then that would put a strain on the health system of Canada, and then as a result, you would be medically inadmissible to Canada. What Canada would like to determine is that would health services would have to spend more than about $20,500 a year per family household. So if a person has some sort of medical inadmissibility, and that medical inadmissibility only requires some sort of pills, then they might be fine. But if that medical inadmissibility requires surgery or any kind of intervention or social aid to visit your house constantly, then you're going to get a procedural fairness letter, and you're going to have to explain how you're overcoming that medical inadmissibility, and it's not always possible.
So I'm going to share a quick story. Deepak, I saw your comment there. Deepak, thank you for sharing that. Unfortunately, I mean, I like the facts that you put out. It's just, there's too much that goes into an immigration analysis. We're not able to provide advice on the cuff. I would probably need to sit down with you or Dvir for about half an hour to an hour to be able to answer your question. So unfortunately, I can't get to that right now, but thank you for asking. I'm going to share a medical admissibility story. I had a very nice young couple, and they were applying for permanent residence, and the young lady had MS, multiple sclerosis disease, and it was determined that she likely will cost the Canadian system over, I think it's $20,517 per year, and it was determined that she would. So we received a procedural fairness letter saying, hey, we think this person's medically inadmissible. And effectively what we responded with was, okay, well, these are the medications she's on now. These are medications that are more affordable. We're switching to these medications. We're doing this. That's going to bring down her health care. We're doing this. And we had to get consultations with doctors. We had to work with a lot of people. We had to really, really, really focus on how we're going to bring down her amounts. And then we went and we did all that. And then we also said, in addition to that, that even, officer, if you don't believe that she's not going to cost the system this much money, then please allow her to come on H&C grounds, humanitarian and compassionate. You know, she has a life here. She's been here for a long time, please. And then finally, we said, by the way, officer, even if none of these things happen, we're not going to go to the Canadian system. We have health insurance. We're going to keep our health insurance. Here's us signing saying we will use our health insurance. And we obtained an approval. And I share that story with you so that you know that if you have folks or people that have medical problems, it doesn't mean that they won't be able to come to Canada necessarily. It does mean that the application is going to require a lot of time and focus and hard work. So I just want to bring that to your attention. Good question. Do you think COVID vaccination will ever become mandatory for admissibility? COVID, will it ever become mandatory for admissibility? Dvir, that question's over my head. I don't know the answer. That's when I defer to my...
You know, obviously, we're in no position to give an answer to that. That's something that is decided on the politicians decide. I do think that it's going to play a factor, meaning I do think that in some cases, if people did get vaccinated and there's enough, that there's going to be enough research on it, some people might have some sort of a card that will show that they've been vaccinated and maybe they won't need to get to be quarantined or stay at the hotel or something. It might eventually be beneficial, but for now it means nothing.
Okay. Alejandro, I see that you asked some questions about the EIC permit. I assume you mean the IEC permit. Again, Alejandro, I'd love to help. It's just we need to know, and it goes to show, just something I'd like to connect with you guys on, is when we deal with an applicant's personal file, it takes a very long time to understand the background and history behind the file well enough to be able to give advice. So it's not that we don't want to give advice, it's that we're afraid that we may not know something and give you bad advice, which helps no one. So it goes to show also, because all of you folks that are pursuing immigration, you have friends that are doing it, people help each other. You have to know that if you're helping a friend or talking to a friend, you need to know every single background fact, or don't comment on the file. It just can't happen.
There is a question by Alejandro, though. Can it get extended? That we can answer. Hypothetically, yes, but it really depends on a lot of things. So generally, International Experience Canada can only be extended if you come from a country that allows it, or if you go through a registered organization. So it really depends on also what program were you in. Were you in the working holiday as a young professional? It really depends on that. And then if you're from a country that it can't be extended, there are other things that can be done. If you want to stay for a little bit longer, you may be able to apply for a TRP or some other kind of work permit that will put you on implied status. So there might be other things that can be done, but on that, every case is different, and we have to look at the individual case, whether you can or cannot.
You guys, I think that we have covered quite a bit of traction right now, and I don't want to go into too much more and bore you to death. If there's any other questions that you have, I'll sort of hold up for a moment and just keep my eye on the right hand of the screen. And if nothing else comes, then we'll move into our concluding comments. So I'm just going to hang tight for one moment and just see if there's any other questions. Okay, I think we are good. I'll stay looking just in case there's anything else that comes up. So you guys, what we want you to take out of today is when you're doing immigration, number one, slow down. Slow down. Number two, read. There's instructional guidelines for everything that you're doing. Number three, seek assistance if you feel that you need it. It's always encouraged. But for those doing it on their own, just go slowly. Don't make any guesses. Those are my comments. I want to thank everybody very much for your time and for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. And Dvir, I'll let you finish, and you can answer Alejandro's and Alex's final comments, or Alejandro's. I'll comment on Alex's after.
So thank you, first of all, Josh, for your time and for answering questions. Generally, what I'd like to say is comment on Alejandro, who asked what are general tips when applying for permanent residency. As Josh mentioned, look, if you're doing it on your own, it's very, very important to read. Canada makes it very accessible, but not very easy. So all the information is out there, but it might have to be, you may have to take it from many, many, many different web pages. So it's very, very important to take your time, go over the application, let somebody else go over your application. You know, I mean, it's better that you or your friend or your family member finds the mistake or finds an issue rather than an officer. So take another week, review it again, and submit it properly. Make sure that all the signatures are there, that all the forms are correct, that you have all the documentary evidence, and then submit the file correctly.
That's great. Just to comment for Alex, you want to know how to get in contact with us. I'd say email's probably the best way. And my name is Joshua Slayen, Joshua Slayen. Dvir's name is Dvir Egdal. And for the purpose of searching us, I operate out of Vancouver and Dvir operates out of Edmonton. Okay. Want to take one last opportunity to thank a very important host, and that is Mark and Alex and torontojobs.ca. Thank you so very much for having us today. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I want to wish everybody a fantastic day. Thank you for your time.
Thanks all. Thank you for your time.